All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Will Kent. I'm here to welcome you to our fourth and final Wikidata Birthday Speaker Series Celebration October event. Thank you all for joining us, whether you're here live or watching the recording in the deep distant future. It's great to see you. I'm excited for our event today. I'm about to introduce all of our panelists. But before I get to that, just a quick reminder that there are several Wikidata birthday events happening. And there's a huge page on Wikidata, and I think we can share that later in the chat. So please feel free to attend those. And then Wikidata's birthday is at the end of the week, so everyone get very excited. And I also just wanted to extend a big thank you to my colleagues, Jamie and Cassidy, for helping me set up these events. The only reason they're good is because they've helped me so much get these off the ground. So thanks, you too. I appreciate it. So let's get started. I want to introduce all our lovely panelists for you. Today, we are joined by Julian Chambliss, who's a professor of English at Michigan State University. He has an appointment in history and the Val Berryman Curator of History at the MSU Museum at Michigan State University. His research interests focus on race, identity, and power in real and imagined urban spaces, and he leads the Department of English Graphic Possibilities Research Workshop, a group that explores critical inquiry, engaged pedagogy as a means of bringing together faculty and graduate students with current and burgeoning interests in comic studies. So thanks for joining us, Julian. We're also joined by Justin Wigard, a postdoctoral research fellow in the Distant Viewing Lab at the University of Richmond, where he works and teaches in the areas of popular culture, game studies, comic studies, children's literature, and digital humanities. He has worked extensively with the Graphic Possibilities workshop as well. We're also joined by Kate Topham, digital humanities archivist at Michigan State University. She specializes in metadata, data migration, digital collections, and has worked on a number of cool projects that cover sound education and music from around the world. She's also very involved with the Graphic Possibilities Workshop. Thanks for joining. And Hilary Thorsen is also with us today, the resource sharing librarian at Stanford University and LD4 coordinator. Previously, she was the Wikimedia in residence for the Linked Data for Production project, and she remains active in the community, leading meetings, coordinating speakers, and advocating for linked data use in libraries. You probably already know her because she's everywhere. So to the four of you, welcome. Thanks for joining me. So to get things started, I was hoping that we could kind of go around and give a little background on what we do with Wikidata, because that's why we're all here, the unifying thread. So Hilary, would you mind starting us off with a little bit of what you do with Wikidata?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I first got started in Wikidata when I was Wikimedia in residence with the Linked Data for Production project. So that was a grant-funded position, and I was working on how libraries could contribute to Wikidata. And it was really great because I got to work with colleagues at other institutions that were participating in the grant who had some Wikidata projects planned, specifically colleagues at Harvard and Cornell. And it was a lot of fun because I was kind of able to try and serve as a resource and learn as much as I could about Wikidata and help them when questions came up, advance their projects. And so it's kind of a result of that early on. We put together the LD4 Wikidata Affinity Group to disseminate that information more broadly. So that group has been meeting since April of 2019, and we meet every other Tuesday and have calls where we share information or have discussions about Wikidata. And then we started the weeks that we don't have a call, having Wikidata working hours so people could join and get some hands-on time with Wikidata. So now that my position as Wikimedian in residence has ended, my work with Wikidata really continues on in the affinity group. So one of the things we've been working on lately is with children's book metadata from the Cooperative Children's Book Center at University of Wisconsin. So that's been a lot of fun. We've put together, along with Susan and a whole host of volunteers who have been helping out a series from data cleanup to batch uploading works and editions for diverse children's books. So that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks for that background, Hilary. Love the LD4 group. Love what you do. Thanks again for for joining us. Julian, would you give us a little bit of background on your work with Wikidata?
Sure. As part of a project that we had here starting in 2018 called Comics as Data, we were actually creating a data set using the MSU library's comic art collection metadata, right? Like the MARC record. And that was a huge project that involved a number of people sitting around a table cleaning data. Um, Kate was there as a number of other people, but because of that project, we really recognized both that we had an opportunity to sort of think about the ways that our collection could be made more accessible. And one of the things that happened during that project is that we often use Wikipedia, various versions of Wikipedia, to sort of flush out information that was in our data catalog about objects that are in our possession. And because of that, we knew both that there were things in the sort of Wikidata world that corresponded to what we had, but also an abundant amount of material that was not there, and became one of the sort of consequences of the end of that sort of like first stage of that project, to think about ways to engage more directly with Wikidata as a means to provide the kind of information about comics that would really enhance people's ability to write about it. And so that really sort of stars down the path that we're on right now.
It's fantastic. I love that project so much. Thanks for that background. Kate, can you give us a little background about what you do with Wikidata?
Sure. So I've been working with the main way I've been working with Wikidata is through Graphic Possibilities. I got into Wikidata through OpenRefine, which is I refer to it as my like it's my software spouse, basically. I do all my work in OpenRefine, and I discovered Wikidata through that as a form of data cleaning. So I've been doing a lot of, I've done a lot of the kind of background work with Wikidata for the events, like figuring out how to use mix and match for our virtual edit-a-thons that we've had, to start adding more things to Wikidata, getting us a collection property so that we can identify all of the works in our collection, and yeah, doing a lot of that stuff. I'm also currently I'm a leading fellow, which is a program through Drexel University, and I'm working with the Schoenberg database of manuscripts with all of their internal link data. And I've been working with it in Wikidata to try and get more of their records into Wikidata, and also using their data to make some kind of network visualization. So I'm really excited about like finding ways to use Wikidata for research and to make things that are more hidden, more visible to everyday people. So that's all I'll say for now. I could talk about OpenRefine and Sparkle forever, but
That's a great place to get started. Thanks, Kate. I love those projects. And Justin, can you give us a little bit of background about what you do with Wikidata too?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So like Kate and Julian, my work with Wikidata is kind of focused really, really closely on comics Wikidata. A big part of this because I recently graduated from Michigan State with my PhD in English. So I, kind of helped get Graphic Possibilities off the ground. But specifically, my kind of focus and contribution has been trying to think through how Wikidata provides really, I think, fruitful and beneficial ways of thinking about community engagement, as well as holds great potential for pedagogy and presenting that kind of open access, data-oriented work in the humanities classroom, especially, right? So, I teach courses on comics and popular culture. And this would have been last fall, I taught a course on comics and graphic narratives. And so I had my students actually engage in some Wikidata work. So they contributed a little bit to Wikidata, and they also created some Wikidata visualizations about comics, as well as some of the work that I did with Graphic Possibilities was trying to coordinate this sort of community of practice of, sort of tried and true dedicated folks, like some of the folks who are actually in attendance today, which is exciting. And thinking about ways that we can kind of try to connect the dots between the classroom, the academy, and Wikidata as this large global asynchronous or sometimes synchronous community of users too. So yeah, I think I've blathered on for long enough too.
That's perfect. Thank you. So you all touched on what my first question is. Thank you for setting it up so nicely. And that is that Wikidata didn't exist 10 years ago. And I'm wondering, for the work that you do and the things that you're most interested in, what has Wikidata changed? What does it allow you to do that a couple years ago you wouldn't be able to do? And this is for whoever unmutes first. Take it away.
I could say a lot of things, but I'll talk about one of the kind of outputs that came from out of the Graphic Possibilities, like out of our first Wikidata edit-a-thon, where we brought together a bunch of participants from all over the US. We had a couple outside of the US people join in as well, to add more things from the MSU Comic Art Collection into Wikidata. And we focused on authors and publishers, making sure those folks were represented. And one of the things that came out of that was we realized that there was a lot of data in our bibliographic data that was just wrong. We had we have a whole article that I have to plug called The Marmaduke Problem about this, where all of our comics that are Marmaduke comics were attributed to the wrong person named Brad Anderson. And that problem exists in a lot of different places. Like there's a Hamtramck comics artist that in our like bibliographic data, it's all attributed to a textile artist from, I think, Switzerland. So we discovered a lot of these like authority mistakes, which aren't really anybody's fault because a lot of people have the same name. But by bringing together this community, we were able to figure out where those errors were and start pooling our knowledge of like, oh, this author published these things, but not these things. And that like community of knowledge and practice allowed for us to like improve on our bibliographic data that we couldn't do before. So Wikidata, through this, making it like public and open, allowed us to kind of pool a bunch of knowledge that we didn't have before.
Other thoughts on how Wikidata has changed what you do?
I think one of the things that we talk about a lot in the research workshop is the way that a kind of cultural question is defined by data. Like, it's similar to what Kay's talking about when he's talking about the sort of authorship problem. But one of the things that we're all been thinking about is the way that like the data record, how can we make sort of nuances around culture and transformations around it more visible. And at some level, we can't really change the library record for in some very real ways, like we can't change it. And so it becomes this thing, we're like, well, we could do something in Wikidata that has a substantive impact in an ability of people's ability to understand what the record is showing, right? And sometimes that understanding is sort of highlighting the sort of nuance around omission. And so just like Kay, I'll point out that we wrote about this in an article on Days of Future Past. You'll notice a theme in our publication pattern. It's like comic related. It's not going to change. Don't even ask. It's always going to. But our goal there was really think about the ways that questions of like race and metadata are they're linked in a way that's very, very much a challenge, but something we kind of have to wrestle with if we want to accomplish some of the transformative work and understanding how we arrive at the place we are when we think about race, when we think about gender, when we think about culture, the way that we do. And so I think Wikidata kind of provides a forum that's accessible to a lot of people. And, the idea of a community of practice has always been one of the things we talked about a great deal when we started this. And it's still something that we continue to think about a lot.
I think that's a great point, Julian, both about how Wikidata lets you expand your description of certain types of items and even go beyond to, for myself, typically types of items that I wouldn't normally describe when I was cataloging. I was working with books and people, locations, occasionally proposing subjects, and with Wikidata, the sky's the limit. You can really find anything that interests you and add it to Wikidata if it's notable enough. And so I found that really exciting, as well as you were saying too, the community aspect of it. Before cataloging had been kind of very internal and very focused on what I was working on at Stanford, and with Wikidata, it becomes so much easier to collaborate with people around the world at other institutions, contribute to other projects through editathons. That's so much fun to get to learn about something like with either Graphic Possibilities or the Boston Rock City editathon that had happened, things that you're not necessarily interested in, but because it's happening and you want to learn something new, it's fun to join those. So it really kind of broadens the ways you can contribute. And then that data, of course, is just shared so much more broadly because it's linked data, and is also so much more accessible too, because you can just start participating in linked data immediately, which is something that was very hard to do before. You could take classes, and then if you were lucky, your institution might have some sort of project that you could get started on, but it was really hard to keep up those skills and find things to work on. So with Wikidata, that's made it just available to a much broader audience for contributions, which I think is just so exciting.
Yeah, I want to like briefly echo everything that Hilary just said, because it was all very much on point. And for me, and kind of thinking about like this question of like, what it enables that I wouldn't have been able to like achieve or think about, 10 years ago. A big part for me is like thinking about how I can get my students to engage with a really wider global public and do that kind of public humanities work. In teaching these literature courses, often I feel like I was relying on tried and true and effective ways of like teaching literary close reading, or engaging in discussion, like doing some other kinds of like in-class work. And then the instant I started including Wikidata into my pedagogy, my students were kind of really quickly able to see the instant ramifications of their work, but also like how the work of in our case literature, but like how their work can connect with like and intersect with data science. It immediately kind of gives them some multidisciplinary approaches to thinking about their work, but it also just gives them an opportunity to think about the ways that their work extends beyond the classroom. It extends beyond like what we think of as like the gated silo of the university, right? It also, I think for me personally, was Wikidata is great because I'm able to connect with colleagues who I didn't know before through Wikidata, right? Like it's not just linked data, but it's almost like linked people, linked communities. Like through our very first event, for example, we were able to bring together, like scholars and librarians from all over the place. But after that first one, we kind of developed this really small but mighty group of frequent participants, and kind of developed almost like our own little literacy of practice regarding comics metadata, as well as like continually share more about what other librarians and like scholars are doing with their comics collections or with their future plans and their other editathons, like Hilary mentioned, right? It's been really exciting.
These answers are amazing. Thank you for sharing them. I love it. And you've all kind of touched on something that I want to focus on, which is the building of community. All month long, we've been exploring different elements and aspects of Wikidata, like the state of Wikidata and cultural heritage, and starting Wikidata projects, growing, sustaining projects. We haven't talked about community yet, and all four of you have either like played a role in building community through a workshop, attended a workshop building community, and they've all been really successful, and you've all kind of pointed to that in what Wikidata has changed. And I know it's really elusive and hard to pin down, but if you could zero in on some characteristics that you think help build community, or that have been a successful component to events that you've either run or attended, I would love to hear your perspectives on those qualities.
I can get started because I feel like I think about this a lot, because it's really probably my favorite thing about Wikidata, and also just the work I've done and the people I've met over the past few years. But I think with building community, being open and transparent is so important. So Wikidata is great to work with because it's already all open and shareable. So that makes contributing easy, and building an open community surrounding it easy as well. I think too, it's important to focus when you are building communities on the people participating, and to try and give people different ways of entry. I think in a conversation I was having recently, Alex Young, who's one of the co-facilitators for the LD4 Wikidata Affinity Group, had called them hooks to kind of join and participate. So not only through outreach, but having different roles that people can contribute to, things that they feel comfortable with. That makes a big difference. And so especially with the affinity group, we've tried as we've had, I got to work for over a year with some really great co-facilitators, Susan Radofsky, Eric Willey, Alex Young, and Sarah Kasten. And then we've recently expanded to be completely open, so anyone can participate. And that was based on Toronto Civic Tech's kind of model that we're using. And I think that's made the community sustainable for the long run. So that's also been important, just because people don't always have time to join every Wikidata call, working hour, all those things. But because we've been able to have consistent programming, people know that if they miss a week, they can join the next time, that kind of thing. So that's kind of another hook to bring people back that I think has been really successful. And then it's been kind of an organic development, but it's easy for new groups to kind of become part of our infrastructure as well, because everything is open and on, at least in kind of the library world, common platforms. Like we use Google Drive and Slack and Zoom. So over the past year, we've had the Wikibase working hour join with us as well. So that's been really exciting, because we've had facilitators for that group be able to join our meetings and we can help promote each other's events, that kind of thing. So I think overall community is what drew me to Wikidata, and what keeps making all of the contributions so worthwhile and coming back.
I think yeah, the idea of community is very important. I think one of the things that defines our approach is sort of purpose built. community. Like we are comic centric. Don't get around that. Within that, though, I think we've always been very mindful of some of what Hilary's talked about, that we need to have different ways in for people. We often sort of position this as a learning experience because we're all learning about Wikidata and trying to foster a community of learning at our institution. In some ways, I think we've been way more successful creating a community of practice that's across institutions, as opposed to like a bunch of people at our institution, which is ironic in a way. But those two things, that we're kind of purpose driven, that we want to build people's capacity around Wikidata, I think are really sort of like central points that drive our approach around community.
You know, it's funny, when we first started doing our Wikidata work, one of the big impetuses was that we had pretty firm plans in early 2020 for what the next year would look like for graphic possibilities happened, and then the pandemic happened, obviously. And so our big pivot actually to Wikidata was in trying to find ways to continue our work digitally, virtually, and also asynchronously in a lot of ways. And so Wikidata provided a really great opportunity for that. And along with what Julian said, and I think Hilary hit the nail on the head too, we had to try to find ways to reach folks who were not fluent in comics, for one, or who were not fluent in Wikidata, or who could or who might not be, like digitally, like literate, fluid expertise at all, but like still wanted to like be part of some kind of a community and contribute something, right? And so we kind of felt that having scaffolded events helped, right? Like having really clear and like defined narrow goals for each event was super helpful. Like, in our fall event, it's upload Wikidata and correct Wikidata, right? Like just focusing on that aspect is a large thing. But even beyond that, it was also like trying to have really firm boundaries of like, okay, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds with Wikidata. Here's like what we're not going to do, or like here's like what we're going to try to avoid, so that it's easier on our participants, as well as having really clear tutorials and being able to troubleshoot issues, right? Because Wikidata can be really overwhelming if you're unprepared for it. It's, on the one hand, it's really easy to say, oh, it's the data side of Wikipedia, and then you load up a Wikidata item and it can be, overwhelming to folks who aren't familiar with it. So I think having that kind of support is helpful. And also just recognizing smaller goals can be just as effective as trying to do something lofty, right? Like trying to do a small goal over the course of like just a couple hours can be just as effective as we found out, right? Like doing something larger for like a 2-day edit-a-thon. We actually started scaling our projects back so that we could achieve more with less, I think. Because these things take time, they take bandwidth, right? Yeah, I'm sure Kate's got something to add too.
Well, when you first asked the question, Will, of like what things have been helpful in building community, and I was like, oh yes, there's been like 2 entities that have been the most helpful, and they are Hilary Thorsen and Will Kent. Because the part of the what really helped me see Wikidata as an opportunity for community was the LD4 affinity group. Just having that like community of practice, and it's such a wonderful community that's so generous and welcoming with one another, that like it provided a model. There's so much in Wikidata and Wikipedia, like, we joke about the need for nerds to correct each other. And I feel like what Will and Hilary, but what both of you have provided a model for, is this very generous opening space that makes working with linked data and working with Wikidata in particular a lot easier. It's I have loved the way that we've framed the edit-a-thons that we've hosted as like just come and we'll help you ask the questions. This whole thing is it's a big conversation, and we get to decide what the best way forward is. And and everything else that everybody else said, those were all really good answers. So that's all I'll say on this.
I want to say one more thing, and then I'm happy to let it go. While everyone's talking, I remember that a couple of things I really want to highlight are the value of different kinds of expertise, as well as like trying to make space for folks outside of like your normal circuit to try to come in and participate, right? So like one reason why our edit-a-thons are I think have been so helpful and so successful, are that we have not just librarians, but like content areas, scholars who don't work with comics, who can like ask different kinds of questions, right? So like, no matter like what kind of Wikidata you're working with or whatever, like having additional perspectives and areas of expertise is helpful, as well as like trying to value those. We also have some really wonderful folks who have been frequent participants who are like independent scholars who like aren't tied to institutions, but really know Wikidata more than we do, right? Like especially shout outs to like Matthew Murray, who is this independent Canadian librarian who just like is a rock star when it comes to Wikidata, and Matthew really helped us think through some of our processes really really clearly, I think. And also asking for help. I gotta echo like Kate, I've pestered Will with so many questions about Wikidata, but also like I just got into the habit of being like, okay, I don't know how to do this thing. Let me ask somebody on the Wikidata community boards and like learn more about what's going on. Let me see what other people have built and then use their work as models, especially like the San Diego State Comic Arts Project, which has tons of visualizations, or, you know, like asking folks who like have been participants once, like what they did when it came to this thing, right? It's asking for help and valuing all kinds of expertise. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's I'm so glad you mentioned this, because I think this like building a good community of practice, like it's good because like it feels good. It's nice to be connected to people, but I think it also just makes Wikidata itself as an institution better, because what Wikidata is trying to do is fundamentally a very difficult thing. It's trying to like, I love the way that Wikidata kind of disrupts library authority, where like we can incorporate a lot more practice, a lot of different expertise, a lot of different ways of seeing the world and seeing the things that we describe. And I think it becomes more, the way we structure things is better because we can draw on so many different communities.
These are some really inspirational points. Thanks for sharing. I'd echo all of them and say that Wikidata is a very realistic way of like approaching a crazy project, which is decentralized. Everyone's an expert in their own area of expertise, and nobody knows everything, which is kind of how the world works, I think. Like the notion that you can be an expert is such a fiction, like in all things, like you can know what you know, but we need help, you know? And I think that, at least for my part, Wikidata has made me very eager to reach out to people. And like the only reason I know half as much of what I know is because I've relied on other people, just like we've all relied on each other over time. Like Wikimedia Deutschland has been super supportive, and so many institutions in Europe leading and sharing their data and their workflows has been amazing for me learning how to do things here. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I want you to go on. So I've got another question for you. Which has to do with running events and building community, which is what's a piece of advice you would give to somebody who's running their first Wikidata event, knowing everything you know now?
I would say small and focused is better. Small and focused is better. I think that has been one of the things that over time we become more and more focused. I would say that we were always focused, but what we want to accomplish in a given like effort, like just shrink it down. And because one of the things about Wikidata that I think is often something that we're reminded of every time we do something is that while on the surface it's relatively straightforward, maybe in reality it's like everything's a doorway to like a whole bunch of different questions. And so having a small sort of focused goal gives you the time to sort of like fully realize the potential around that small focused goal. And the other thing I'd be like, just copy more. Just go to like the Wikidata thing and just copy more. Cause like it solves some problems. Like it creates its own set of problems, but it solves a lot of problems because you're like, oh, it should look like that. Like just copy more. Start small and copy more. More than what you're comfortable with is what I would say. Like just because there's an instinct if you're in academia, you're like, well, don't I have to do it all my no, you don't. You don't, you can just copy and then change. Right? Like do that.
I would point folks to the LD4 affinity group Wikidata Wiki Editathon tutorial that was created for the 9th birthday last year, actually. If you just I'll drop a link in the chat, or if you just Google like wiki project like Wikidata Editathon 9th birthday, you'll eventually get there. Or search for like Editathon tutorial or something like that. But there's a really wonderful tutorial on Wikidata itself about how to get started running your own wiki editathon that has advice for choosing topics, choosing scale and scope, as well as like choosing the right platform to create community or to create one in your like a physical space, right? Like there's a lot of there's quite a few things to consider, but yeah, just keeping it small, keeping it focused, and also kind of just testing the waters, right? Like you might achieve everything you want to and then realize, oh, maybe we want to do something different next time, right? But keeping it small and focused, I think, is like the biggest thing. And also really kind of looking at tutorials and structures that exist to hack them for your own purposes, right? Like that's one of the biggest things that I learned is, like we borrowed some models in our second time and then also started like hacking and creating our own stuff when we realized that like we needed something slightly different for our purposes. And also what's kind of great too is that a lot of stuff on Wikidata is very malleable and can be fixed, right? So like as Will showed me, when you're trying to make like visualization, for example, as long as you make it, you can hack it, break it, and mash it up as much as you want to and experiment with it. It's kind of great. Like it's very resilient, I guess is a good way to think about it. You're not going to break everything.
Yeah, I definitely would echo the keep small focused goals. But I will add a small addendum that is, but prep in case you finish. Because that happened in our first event. We were like, we'll just focus on golden age publishers and authors, and then we like finished it. And after the first day, I had to go into OpenRefine and pull out more data to put into mix and match, which was great. It was like I was very happy to do that. So I think small and scoped and also flexible. I think it's really I think it's very powerful to when everybody's like in the thick of doing some kind of event. I think it's great to be able to say, okay, this was our goal. And maybe we've achieved that goal and we want to do something else, or allowing people to kind of pursue their interests a little bit. Like I think a few people, we were just trying to get publishers into Wikidata, and a few people said, okay, I've added 5 publishers and I'm going to add more statements to them. But like allowing for creativity within your scoped event, I think can be really, really powerful and fun.
I definitely agree with all that everyone has said about keeping things small, allowing for creativity. And that kind of made me think of something you had brought up earlier, Kate, about how you had framed the editathon. So you could just come and participate. You didn't need to already know things. So I guess also considering your audience, because you know, certainly we try with the affinity group to have a lot of events for people just getting started in Wikidata, but then we'll also have some topics that are a bit more advanced. So one of the things that's always a bit of a challenge is, you know, if you're working with OpenRefine to have people install it ahead of time. So thinking of kind of the logistic things and what can make that easier for people so that when they get to the event, they have more time to actually spend editing or participating. And then I think too, with this latest Wikidata working hour series, we've been recording them. So that seems like it's been helpful for people, because if it is something they're learning for the first time, to have that to go back to. And then the other thing I was thinking too is it's been really nice with our working hour series on the children's books. We've had different people leading the session. So just to see how kind of other teaching styles and demoing styles of using Wikidata is really great. And actually that happened on our last affinity group call, where we were demoing gadgets and user scripts. So it's interesting just to how effective it is to see other people editing in Wikidata and what they do, and then think, oh, okay, this is something I do, but this would make it so much easier to do, or this is another perspective on how to do that I could try out. I found that really helpful as well, just in terms of thinking about once you have a goal of doing something in Wikidata, how you accomplish that. There are always more paths to get there. So it's been really neat to be able to see how other people get to that goal.
Yeah, I had one thought pop up while you're talking, Hillary, because I love that sentiment too, and thinking about like gadgets and like the tools that exist on Wikidata, because they're such a robust thing. One thing to keep in mind, and this kind of goes back to like the flexibility part, is that all of these tools, right, are you know, community driven, and they're also open access, and occasionally they don't work the way that they should. Sometimes you know, like they're not quite updated, or maybe something just kind of goes wrong in the back end, and like you know, you were planning on running a whole event around one specific tool, and then that tool doesn't work the day of the event. Having a plan B, and if you're me, a plan C that's like a very low tech way to contribute to Wikidata is really, really helpful, right? So like as one example, when I was teaching that unit on Wikidata in my comics course, mix and match wasn't working the way that it had the last time I had used it. Like even like earlier that week, for whatever reason, something just kind of evolved or shifted a little bit. And so I kind of had to pivot pretty quickly and kind of just focus on teaching Wikidata literacy, which is like an event all its own and a really important thing. In hindsight, what I wish I'd had my students do is start creating some pages and discussions on Wikidata, right? Like those are really low-tech ways to contribute to Wikidata and talk about all of these things. Well, you know, maybe not necessarily creating or uploading new Wikidata, it's still contributing to the community in a really important way, I think, right? You can always return to those tools later, or return to the original plan if you have to pivot sometime in the future. It's not like that plan is gone forever, right?
Great points. Love this conversation. Thanks, everybody. I think, let's see, we've been talking about community a lot, but I'm kind of curious about what you're most proud about with working on Wikidata, because it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's not the easiest thing to work with. There's no manual. It's not like it's been around for a long time. You're not taught Wikidata in schools yet. So I'm curious, like, if it's something that you've done on Wikidata, or if it's like the impact of a project, or if you're way too modest and you want to deflect it to what you're proud about Wikidata for doing, feel free to interpret it that way too. But like one thing that just comes to your mind that you're like, oh, this is really, really cool. And I know you've all done very cool things. So
Okay, I guess I'm proud of, so like the thing that I'm most excited about is really trying to think about comics as data, and specifically comics as Wikidata, because it's just not something that like is often done in our like little sub area, right? It's and thinking about comics in terms of Wikidata immediately opens up about a million new possibilities related to that thing, that I wasn't expecting, right? Thinking about these things as these really rich materials that have tons of that have information that should be much more open access and should be able to reach new communities, but also ways that we can make our specific asset that much more linked and connected, right? But it also, thinking about comics as data in that way got me thinking about all of these other kinds of avenues of pop culture in my area, in my area of kind of focus. Think about ways that I can upload those or do work with them in conjunction with Wikidata and continue to reach new communities, right? It's just kind of like the instant I started thinking about comics as data, I was like, oh, and immediately like 8,000 doors open. It's really exciting. Like I think that's what's awesome about Wikidata itself, right? It's not just, like I was saying, like linked data, linked people, but also like linked ideas too. It's
Yeah, I think MSU, Michigan State University, has a very vigorous digital humanities community. And one of the things about working with Wikidata, very much from my perspective, is that, when we started the Comic as Data project, when you do digital humanities, there's an element where you have to like know when to stop, like, claim victory and go, let's assess where we are moving forward now. And that moment in the first phase of the Comics Data Project was like, okay, the data set is a thing. So let's have that and make it accessible and see how it will grow. And when we were reflecting, that's when let's do something with Wikidata became like a kind of mission vision thing. And now when I think about Wikidata, I think about it very much in the context of like a discussion about access, open access, about open educational resources, about data literacy. There are very, very important questions for students, right? So those are questions in terms of like digital humanities theories and practice that we kind of need to have discussions about at a place like ours, where like a kind of data, understanding of data becomes a fundamental question of, quite frankly, civil society, right? And so, this question of open access, this question of what is linked data, and like Justin, I have taught students not necessarily explicitly Wikidata, because but just around the question, like, let's look at the data set that's derived from a cultural object. What is linked data? What does that mean? What does that kind of like data description actually translate to in terms of like how society operates? Yeah, they have done things like that, and giving them a smaller subset of data to sort of play around with so they can tell stories using data is something that happens in class. And those are much more nuanced set of conversations. And while they may not necessarily have the same set of outcomes that you might expect at as a graduate research project, I do understand that they understand the ways that the sort of the language of data has an impact on their everyday life, which I think is really important for them to understand. And so that's a way where the Wikidata fits within a much more complicated, nuanced narrative about information and data literacy that I think is really important.
Yeah. This, yes, going off of what Julian said, I'm teaching data ethics class this semester, and it's like a brand new class, and it's all very new to me. But we've been reading the Data Feminism book by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein. That's excellent. Everybody go read it. And one of the chapters is all about pluralism as a data feminist value. And I had my students work with Wikidata for Pluralism Week because I love how it allows for multiple perspectives to be represented. There's a lot of different ways you can encode things based on like how it seems to you, like working with different properties, working with qualifiers. There's a million different ways you can work with Wikidata. And so I love Wikidata as a platform for data pluralism, and it also allows to think about what the effect of that is, because there's also the argument that means your data is really messy and bad, but it also means that it's so much richer. But I'll also say I love the reciprocity between like research and libraries that Wikidata allows for, that like Wikidata can help enrich the metadata we have, and the metadata can also help us add more stuff to Wikidata so that both become a lot better.
I think mine is pretty practical, and can actually be seen in the name of this, but a few years ago, a group of librarians were at the Blacklight Summit, and we were all talking about Wikidata, and someone had the idea to put together a wiki project, practical Wikidata for librarians, to gather resources for people, library focused, and training, both training and things about gadgets and tools, queries, data models. So Arcadia Falcone at Stanford, Matt Miller at Library of Congress, Ruth Tillman, Christine Sumner Aslau at Harvard were some of the co-contributors to the initial page. And so I had done a lot with gadgets and user scripts, because I found that one of the hardest things when I was first getting into Wikidata, to like, I'd install a gadget or put in a user script and then try to figure out like, well, okay, what does this do? Like how do you actually use it? And so added some kind of step-by-step documentation there. So if that makes anyone's life easier as they're getting started in Wikidata, that makes me really happy. And since then, more people have added things to it, which is also really great when you either create an item or work on a project on Wikidata and then others are contributing to it. That's a really great feeling as well too.
Awesome responses. Thank you for entertaining that question. We're running a little low on time, so I just have one or two more for you. And I want to combine a question I had with one that's really great from Jessica in the Q&A section. And that's that Wikidata is turning 10 this year. That means before you know it, it'll be driving. And a lot's going to change in the next couple of years. And I'm curious what role you see Wikidata playing in the future. And Jessica's question is also, what direction do you see Wikidata going in that it hasn't moved in, or that it hasn't gone in yet already?
I think one of the things that we talked about in my class on pluralism in Wikidata was the affinity. There's the LD4 affinity group created a checklist for an ethics checklist for your linked data project, and Wikidata has these principles, but I would love to see something like that specifically for Wikidata, because it's a public data set and there's a lot of privacy issues, and we want to make sure that people of all identities are represented, but we also don't want to necessarily prescribe somebody's identity for them. Yeah, I could talk a lot about what Wikidata could be, but that's something that I would be really excited to see.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that for me personally, I think Wikidata and other sorts of open access, open source linked repositories of data are going to become increasingly necessary and relevant as other avenues of data become more monitored, privatized, siloed, whatever you call it, right? Like there's something really powerful and amazing about Wikidata and the fact that it's grown this much over 10 years. And so I think it's really that open linked nature in all of its links and in all of its open facets is its biggest boon. And so for me, I think that where I'm hoping to see Wikidata, even in the next 5 years, I just kind of want to see more of it. I want to see more projects. I want to see it in more classrooms because again, it should be, you know, taught and used in classrooms alongside of Wikipedia. And I want to see more, selfishly, more comics and other sorts of Wikidata projects, right? But I want to see what other people do with it that I haven't thought about because I'm still a newbie. Even it feels weird to even be on this panel with my esteemed colleagues who feel like, you know, Wikidata experts to me, but I just want to see more of it, I think. Yeah, I'm more excited about the work that other people are doing with Wikidata than my own.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I am in no way, shape, or form a Wikidata expert, but I do recognize in Wikidata this tremendous potential to be a space to support really sort of interesting conversations. You know, one of the things as a humanist, you know, someone in the humanities who thinks about technology, the challenge for people in the 21st century is around balancing a kind of understanding with their ability to practice, right? And I see this with students all the time. At some level, they have been born consumers of technology, but how it actually works is this weird problem for them. And especially data is particularly complicated for them. And I've been in a classroom and said to them as clearly as possible, you know, it's not actually free. The thing they're selling is you, right? Like if you don't have any sense of like data, you know, data literacy, you are going to be in trouble. You just don't know it because you don't have any sense. But if you get a little sense, you start to understand. And so like this idea that data is a thing that's intrinsically connected to their life is something that they have to acquire somehow, and having open linked data spaces where they can learn and sort of understand is a really important thing, even though I worry that just the nature of it being data driven is really complicated for students. So, you know, one of the things, you know, how do you make Wikidata and other linked data projects more open? Like, you know, is there another language other than Sparkle? Let's create it, right? Like something, you know, is there something else that could be there? Because I do think it's important in that regard. So it is definitely something that we will continue to, I think about, as I say, you know, this question of open access and the sort of educational mission of a big land grant university, though they are connected. And so at some level, I think we're speaking directly to that mission when we work with this, with Wikidata.
I think those are all great points, and we'll just briefly add, I liked what you said, Kate, about an ethics checklist. And And what you were saying too, Julian, about making Wikidata as accessible as possible. So, really continuing to develop tools that are easy for people to just jump in and use. So you don't have to have a lot of specialized knowledge, and tools that make it so much easier to connect data sets as well. And then just the third thing being just to have, Wikidata being a part of more an integrated part of library school curriculum. And because it seems like, it's a real necessary skill. So 5 years from now, you're going to want to have that on your resume. So just making it as easy for people to learn about and get access to as possible.
These are all such stimulating points. I think Susan in the chat said she'd love to see these conversations keep going somewhere. I would love to see them keep going somewhere too. But we're out of time for this little chat. So we're gonna have to pause them briefly. But I would invite anyone to keep talking about these awesome topics in Wikidata and celebrating it, whether it's its birthday or not. Get out there and make some edits, bring in some new people. And I just want to take another moment to thank all of the panelists, Kate, Hilary, Julian, Justin. Thank you so much for your time and expertise and sharing your awesome perspectives on data, linked data, comics, community in the world, and Wikidata. So this is our last speaker series for the month of October. Happy birthday, Wikidata. I'll get the recording uploaded soon so we can always have these warm memories and celebrate. That's all I've got. Thanks, everybody, and see you later.